The Life of All For One, My Hero Academia. All For One, real name Shigaraki, is the former leader and benefactor of the League of Villains, the main antagonist of the Hideout Raid Arc, and the overarching antagonist of the series. Once Japan's most powerful villain and All Might's arch-nemesis, his full identity is unknown. His true motive is to take his little brother's Quirk, one for all, the only power that can oppose him. His current goal is to raise Tomura Shigaraki to become his new vessel by hijacking his body to steal One for All for good, as well as to remake himself in greater power. He was imprisoned in Tartarus after his second defeat at All Might's hands until he escaped, laying low waiting for his new body to heal. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of All For One. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media accounts. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Background. The introduction of quirks to the world led to a period of societal collapse and an age of upheaval. During this time, a man with an overwhelmingly powerful quirk called All For One arose in Japan and decided to take advantage of the chaos. He stole many quirks, attaining immense power and influence. Using his incredible might, the man gathered and unified dozens of people under his command. All For One's younger brother Yoichi opposed his evil as All For One tried to show him that he was helping people by ridding those who believed themselves plagued and giving strength to those who were helpless. Yoichi saw through All For One's claims, deeming that he's only trying to amass people who owe him into servitude. All For One defended this by stating his quirk is able to return order to the world that has lost its humanity at the hands of quirks. Yoichi refuses to give in to his brother's manipulative statements and tried to rebel, but was stopped by All For One's personal bodyguard. All For One berated his brother for not having a quirk, but says that he still loves him as he's his only family and imprisoned him rather than killed him. When All For One visited his captive brother, he saw how thin he became due to not eating. All For One tells his brother about how a group who refused to join him were killed, simply because his followers interpreted his desires as instructions to kill them. Yoichi was disgusted and voiced his defiance. All For One then used his quirk to forcibly give his little brother a quirk that could stockpile power in order to make him submit to him, but also to make him more powerful. What no one knew at the time is that Yoichi already had an innate quirk which can only be transferred to others. The two quirks mutated, blending together, and would later be known as One For All. Battle against One For All's users. Yoichi wasn't strong enough to defeat his brother even with his new quirk, so he passed it on to the next generation in hopes that one day, One For All would be strong enough to defeat his older brother. All For One fought and killed nearly all of these successors, including attempting to steal One For All from the 5th and 6th users, but failed due to its inherent willpower and refusal to submit to All For One, as the quirk continued to be passed on. Several generations later, the 7th torchbearer, Naneshimura, with her pupil and 8th bearer Toshinori Yagi and her friend Gran Torino, tried to stop him. However, despite their best efforts, All For One still overwhelmed them. The villain thanked Nana for providing quality comedy and finished her off with a large flash of black lightning. Many years later, after Tenko Shimura accidentally murdered his family during the awakening of his quirk, All For One met him under a bridge and granted him a home and safety. After Tenko murdered 2 street punks, All For One provided him with his costume consisting of the hands of Tenko's dead family members, and he named him Tomura. All For One went so far as to give his own surname Shigaraki to Tenko. After this, All For One began grooming Tomura as his successor and as the new symbol of terror. The Threat of All Might. Toshinori Yagi, Nana's disciple, returned to Japan after a long absence in the United States and soon became All Might, Japan's #1 hero and symbol of peace. All For One attempted to stop All Might with his soldiers and accomplices, though All Might was able to best all of them, and with his actions, All Might began to dismantle All For One's criminal empire. All For One began to suspect that he would eventually be defeated, so he took several contingency measures in case this would happen, such as sending Gigantomachia away into the woods for hiding. Likewise, in collaboration with Kyudai Garaki, All For One duplicated his own quirk with the intention of transferring it to Tomura Shigaraki when the time comes. At some point, All For One recovered the body of the deceased Oboro Shirakumo and had Kyudai turn him into the Nomu called Kurogiri, who served as their close confidant and assistant. The Underground Masquerade. A few years later, in the city of Osaka, All for One organized an illegal fighting event known as the Underground Masquerade. The event helped him move illegal drugs, test different variants of quirk-boosting drugs, and search for interesting quirks worth stealing. His activities attracted the attention of the hero O'Clock, who infiltrated the tournament by posing as a fighter, obtaining evidence of drug trafficking. All for One, who had been watching the fights from the security room, decided to harvest some quirks. He released a gas that empowers the quirks, making those who breathe it go on a rampage. To prevent anyone from fleeing, All for One deployed his subordinates, including a hooded man, and with the help of Kurogiri and his warp gate, he steals those quirks that interest him. All for One was especially eager to get a hold of O'Clock's quirk, Overclock. The hero allied with Rumi and Kendo Rappa, one of the underground fighters, to escape from there. Their escape was interrupted by the hooded man, leading to a battle between them. All for One is annoyed at being unable to see a clear view of the battle due to most of the security cameras being destroyed, as well as the panicking spectators getting in the way. He contemplates clearing the arena himself, but Kurogiri disagrees as he believes any further escalation might summon All Might to the place, further irritating All for One. He decides to let the situation settle on its own. When realizing that the hooded man was too difficult a foe to defeat by his own means, O'Clock put in motion an emergency plan which consisted of Rumi escaping and warning his allies outside to request the assistance of All Might. The plan worked, and All Might immediately left his hero office to help out in Osaka. Kurogiri informed All for One that since All Might is on the way, they should retreat so not to lose their valuable test subjects, as well as O'Clock. But All for One, annoyed that he couldn't watch the fight between O'Clock and the hooded man, instead requested Kurogiri to assist him in buying some time. After explaining to Kurogiri the dichotomy between heroes and villains, All for One places his hand on several of the unconscious individuals, utilizing his quirk on each of them to boost their powers, transforming them into violent villains who rampage the city streets. All for One was satisfied with the results because even All Might would waste time protecting everyone and re-establishing order, but Kurogiri tells him that he's gone too far with his action because the incident would serve as a clue that leads back to them. All for One didn't care about it, arguing that it's a risk well worth the chance to get the Overclock quirk. All Might shows up and defeats all the villains in the blink of an eye. Kurogiri relents that All Might's actions barely bought them any time. With All Might closing in, Kurogiri uses his quirk to quickly retrieve the hooded man. Once in the hideout, Hood rampages around yelling that he can still fight when he's stopped and restrained by All for One. All for One tells Kurogiri to transport him over to the doctor for further modification. Despite the failure, All for One keeps calm and reflects that he can be patient, since every step leads him closer to All Might, though still states that getting his hands on Overclock would have furthered the cause, saying that it will be his eventually, and he already knows how he'll put it to use. The fall and rise of All for One. All Might eventually fought and critically injured All for One, but he similarly received a debilitating wound in the process. Incapacitated by his defeat, All for One went into hiding as he attempted to heal from his injuries. During this period of time, All for One stole a super regeneration quirk, which he believed would be of use to help his condition, however learned that due to most of his wounds having cauterized, it had little effect on him. At some point, the hero O'Clock infiltrated one of his lairs, coming face to face with the villain, who snatched his quirk Overclock and wounded his face, leaving a distinctive scar. He continued to groom Tomura Shigaraki as his successor, well aware that Tomura was really the grandson of Nana Shimura, and wanted to use this to his advantage. He also assigned Kurogiri with serving and overseeing Tomura's development, warning Kurogiri to use Gigantomachia once he believes to no longer be capable of ensuring Tomura's safety. Sometime prior to the start of the school year, he created the League of Villains, an organization for Tomura to run and enlist villains to aid in his cause, while acting as a front for his true goals. U.S.J. Arc. After failing in their attempt to assassinate All Might, Kurogiri warps himself and an injured Tomura back to their hideout at the last second, allowing them to escape from being defeated. Tomura berates over his failure, his injuries, losing all their subordinates, his Nomu being defeated, and All Might surviving. However, All for One, speaking on the monitor, says that nothing went wrong and that he was simply over-optimistic. Tomura mentions one kid in particular who kept getting in his way and had a power similar to All Might's, which interests All for One. He says that it's too late to mourn and that they should gather a new group handpicked for efficiency, saying that they should take all the time they need. All for One tells Tomura that he's a symbol of importance and that next time he will show the world the horror of his existence. UA Sports Festival. A recuperating Tomura watches the UA Sports Festival, including the obstacle race where he sees Izuku Midoriya take first place. Later on, before the battle between Izuku and Shoto Todoroki begins, All for One tells Tomura to pay close attention to their match, as they might become obstacles for him in the future. Tomura responds by telling his sensei to not make him laugh. Versus Hero Killer Arc. All for One, using his monitor to speak through, orders Kurogiri to allow Stain and Tomura to continue talking, saying that Tomura's meeting with Stain, an experienced infamous villain, will stimulate Tomura's growth. Before he leaves for Hosu, Tomura asks All for One to let him borrow some Nomu because he doesn't like the hero killer Stain, and that destroying things he doesn't like seems alright. All for One decides to give Tomura 3 Nomu, hoping that Tomura will make the opportunity a learning experience. In the aftermath of the incident, 2 of the Nomu are killed, 1 is detained, and Stain is captured. The latter surprises All for One, but he's still happy that things are going as he's foreseen. He exclaims that Tomura's position is to supervise and unify the new villains who have come to join the League of Villains. Dr. Garaki expresses doubt that Tomura can do his job and says that if All for One stepped in, things would be proceeding faster. All for One proceeds to ask the doctor to patch him up faster, adding that he will let Tomura do all the hard work so that he may become his successor, as Tomura was born to do so. All for One tells All Might to rejoice in the transient peace while they still can. My Hero Academia 2 Heroes. Learning about David Shield's plan to break into Eye Island during its expo, All for One contacted Wolfram, the villain hired to assist in the scheme, and provided him with an additional muscle augmentation quirk, wanting to have a hand in All Might's former partner's fall to villainy. Hideout Raid Arc. After the Vanguard Action Squad's successful capture of Katsuki Bakugo and Ragdoll, All for One promptly stole her search quirk. After Katsuki attacks Tomura in defiance of joining their cause, Tomura understands that mere words alone won't convince Katsuki to join them and decides to ask for the force of his teacher to help him convince Katsuki. All for One, who's been watching Tomura on his computer, commends his apprentice for his wise decision. The League of Villains is soon apprehended by the pro-heroes and police force. All for One decides to take action himself, emerging at the Nomu manufacturing warehouse, and apologizes to Tiger, explaining that Ragdoll is in a comatose state because he stole her quirk Search, which he found to be quite useful. Best Jeanist restrains All for One with his quirk and orders his fellow pro-heroes to not let the villain do anything. Before the pros can act, the entire warehouse is completely destroyed and the surrounding area suffers extensive damage as well. All for One had unleashed a blast wave that had seemingly killed the pro-heroes, destroying the warehouse and dealt significant damage to the surrounding area in less than a second. All for One claps and praises Best Jeanist for using his quirk to pull his fellow heroes out of the way in order to reduce the blast's impact on them. Despite his heavy injuries, Best Jeanist attempts to fight back and begins sending fiber strings. However, All for One impales Best Jeanist from afar. The mighty villain mentions that he doesn't need his quirk because it doesn't suit Tomura's personality. Tomura, Kurogiri, the Vanguard Action Squad, and Katsuki all materialize from the black liquid in front of All for One. The villain sees that his apprentice has failed again, however, All for One is neither angry nor disappointed with Tomura and encourages him to try again since he still has the Vanguard Action Squad, and Katsuki, whom he deemed important. All for One implores Tomura to continue trying as many times as he likes, since everything is for his sake. Suddenly, All Might appears above him and attacks him. However, All for One blocks his attack as All Might declares that he will take everything back, while All for One wonders if All Might will attempt to kill him again. All Might and All for One clash, which creates a shockwave that sends Katsuki, Tomura, and the Vanguard Action Squad backwards. Both All for One and All Might criticize each other for becoming weaker. All Might declares that he will save Katsuki and won't repeat the same mistakes he did 6 years ago, and this time he will definitely put All for One behind bars along with the League of Villains. All Might charges at his arch-nemesis, but All for One sends another huge blast wave at All Might, causing the symbol of peace to be sent flying away with great force. All for One's blast wave attack not only hits All Might, but destroys several buildings in the process. All for One uses a quirk that forcefully activates Kurogiri's warp gate, which causes a portal to open. All for One orders the League of Villains to escape into Kurogiri's portal. Suddenly, All Might reappears onto the battlefield, refusing to allow the arch-villain to escape and charges at All for One, but All for One uses his warping quirk to teleport Gran Torino in front of him, using the elderly hero as a human shield, which causes Gran Torino to take All Might's attack instead. All for One expresses his hatred for All Might, as he's the one who brought down his comrades in the past, and while he descended into darkness, All Might rose to the top as the symbol of peace. All for One prepares to fire his Blast Wave move, intending to blow away Gran Torino and All Might at the same time. However, All Might pulls Gran Torino away and uses a Detroit Smash to cancel out All for One's Blast Wave move. All for One sees that his destruction of the city has brought chaos, and decides to put the innocent civilians in danger so that All Might won't be able to fight at full strength. Furious with All for One's sadism, All Might grabs his arm while throwing Gran Torino away for safety. All Might punches All for One in the face, shattering his mask. However, All Might's punch wasn't strong enough to finish him off. As Gran Torino calls out to him, All Might's face reverts to its true form. All For One says that All Might wouldn't be the first to criticize him, as he's heard those same lines before, from the previous One For All successor, Nana Shimura. All Might is angry at the archvillain for mentioning her name, as All For One notes that Nana was all bark and no bite, only going on about her ideals and wasn't even strong. He mocks her for her uselessness and mentions that she died in an embarrassing, shameful way. Furious, All Might prepares to attack All For One, but he proceeds to use his blast wave technique against All Might, causing the hero to be blasted into the air. Gran Torino catches All Might and lands him to safety on the ground. All For One decides to finish his apprentice's hard work and fires another wave blast attack at All Might, who, seeing that an innocent civilian is trapped under the rubble behind him, blocks All For One's attack and saves the civilian from being harmed. However, All Might expends the last of his power and reverts to his true form. All For One relishes in the fact that All Might's true form has been exposed for all to see. Everyone around the country sees All Might's true form and begins panicking. Wanting to break his spirit even more, All For One reveals that Tomura is Nana's grandson. All Might is demoralized and refuses to believe him, but All For One tells him that it's the truth. All For One wonders why All Might isn't smiling and sarcastically remarks about All Might's smile, which is something Nana would always do. All Might's spirit is greatly demoralized by the mockery, while All For One continues relishing in All Might's pitiful state. Invigorated by the civilian, All Might activates One For All throughout the right side of his body, transforming it into its hero form. All For One prepares to fire his blast wave attack when suddenly flames strike at the mighty villain. All For One is surprised by the appearance of Endeavor and Edgeshot, specifically how they were able to make haste of the Nomu much faster than he anticipated. Annoyed with the pro hero's interference, All For One prepares his blast wave attack again. However, Edgeshot uses his quirk and great speed to attack, but All For One dodges the attack. Growing tired with the sentimental talk, All For One blasts Endeavor and Edgeshot back and activates a number of his strongest quirks in his right arm, causing it to become an enlarged, mutated arm filled with numerous deadly screws and hardened minerals. All For One charges at All Might with his heavily empowered and mutated arm. Both All For One and All Might clash by punching each other with their enhanced fists. As they struggle, All For One uses his impact recoil quirk to revert all the damage to All Might. However, All Might transfers One For All to his right arm, sacrificing his right arm, but renders impact recoil ineffective. All Might refuses to die and punches All For One, who has left his guard open. The punch, however, was meant to lower All For One's guard, and All Might transfers One For All to his right arm and prepares for his final attack, United States of Smash, which creates a great shockwave when it hits All For One. After the dust clears, All For One is in a crater, badly beaten and unconscious. Later, Endeavor and All Might watch All For One being placed in an Iron Maiden. The next day, All For One is incarcerated into Tartarus, a special prison for criminals for whom the death penalty is not enough. While being pushed to his holding cell, All For One isn't angry or upset by losing against All Might. Instead, All For One is happy because his defeat at All Might's hands will grow Tomura's hatred for All Might as well as his regret for being unable to save his sensei, which will motivate him to gain experience and become much stronger. All For One smiles, knowing that even though he lost the battle, he still will succeed at being the better teacher than All Might, and that his successor will come out on top. Provisional Hero License Exam Arc. During the Hero License Exam, All For One receives a visit from All Might. All For One comments on the severe strictness of the prison he's being held in, that even if he were to try and activate a quirk, he'd be put down instantly. All Might assures All For One that he will never escape, nor is he getting out anytime soon from this prison of hell. Moving along, All For One questions again what All Might wants. The former hero All Might wants to know the whereabouts of Tomura Shigaraki, which the villain answers that he doesn't know, and unlike him, he's already let Tomura carry on. All Might proceeds to question him about his motives, but the villain claims All Might is never going to be satisfied by his answers. All For One makes his answer simple. Both he and All Might are the same. All For One wishes to be the king of evil in the same way All Might wants to be the symbol of peace. All Might asks if All For One wanted to live forever being utterly evil, then why does he need a successor? All For One finds All Might's question funny, answering that All Might took everything away from him, leaving him in a regrettable state to the point he needs complex devices to survive. Because of this, his influence and ideals had become limited thanks to him, so he's been grooming Tomura Shigaraki to become his successor and carry on his legacy. All For One decides to make a hypothesis then. With All Might's retirement, Endeavor has become the new #1 hero. However, it doesn't seem that it'll be enough to contain the anxiety and concern of society, and sensing the growing insecurity in the world, the villains will rise up, believing it to be their chance to change society. In this situation, Tomura and his allies will grow in power and influence to reach the top, although they will have to clash other organizations that also intend to do the same, clashes in which All Might will be unable to do anything. All For One mockingly asks All Might how it feels to be absolutely powerless. His words make All Might angry, who replies to All For One not to presume everything. All Might understands that he chose Tomura as his successor because he was the grandson of his master Nana, but he won't allow All For One's twisted vision to be realized, and he won't let himself be killed by Tomura. All For One wonders if All Might came here to tell him that. As he leaves, All Might tells All For One he will smash his plans as many times as it takes, and he'll pass the rest of his life in prison. As the prison cell begins closing, All For One chuckles at All Might's final statement. Pro-Hero Arc. All For One claims he's willing to restore Ragdoll's quirk back to her, but that it would require activating his own quirk to do so. The authorities determine the safest approach is to not let him do anything while investigating the number of quirks he has stockpiled. Joint Training Arc. All For One seems to set off the alarms in Tartarus by moving inside his cell, claiming to hear the voice of his younger brother. Paranormal Liberation War Arc. While investigating and analyzing Kurogiri, who they had captured several months ago, Naomasa Tsukauchi, Gran Torino, Shota Aizawa, and Hisashi Yamada find out that he's a Nomu created from the corpse of Oboro Shirakumo. When they question All For One about his methods to create the Nomu, the villain simply responds with a metaphor, in which he compares the creation of the Nomu as producing wine. Trampling grapes, people, to extract the juices, Quirk, and let them ferment into wine, Nomu. This, along with other data obtained by Hawks, allows the heroes to locate Tomura Shigaraki, who's at the Jaku General Hospital, undergoing a complex and extensive operation at the hands of Kyudai Garaki to obtain more power, transplanting the original All For One quirk to him. To avoid this, the heroes raid the hospital a month before the operation ends, as well as other bases of the Paranormal Liberation Front, a formation between the League of Villains and the Metal Liberation Army. Not without great difficulties, the heroes manage to reach the secret laboratory under the hospital and prevent Kyudai from awakening Tomura prematurely, destroying the machine that kept him alive, with even Kyudai believing that his master's dream has ended due to Tomura appearing to be dead. While Tomura is in a state of apparent death, he enters a dream world where he sees and interacts with representations of his relatives, until a shadowy vestige of All For One appears, telling him to come to him. Tomura's family reappears to stop him, even his grandmother Nana, yet despite their pleas to not fall into his darkness, Tomura rejects them and embraces his master. Tomura unexpectedly awakens and immediately uses his empowered decay to destroy the hospital, killing dozens of heroes in the process and even destroying much of the nearby city. After this, he orders Gigantomachia to come to him, bringing the members of the League with him, but he also begins to hear a voice inside his head that orders him to go get the One-for-All quirk. Tomura begins to be attacked by Endeavor and other heroes, but impelled by the voice inside him, he uses his search quirk to locate One-for-All, discovering it in possession of Izuku Midoriya, heading towards him. Tomura manages to reach Izuku, starting a bloody battle between him against Izuku, Katsuki, Endeavor, Shota Aizawa, Gran Torino, and several other heroes. To prevent more heroes from interfering, Tomura summons a group of Nomu to confront the reinforcements. While all this is happening, All For One is seen smiling within his cell. While facing Izuku, Tomura ends up calling him his little brother, a statement that leaves both of them confused. This allows Tomura to realize that the mysterious inner voice comes from the ego of his master that exists within All For One, who tries to take over his will. Tomura thanks his master for raising him from the bottom of his heart, but refuses to be controlled by him, as he wants to be greater than All For One was, and breaks free from his image in his mind. After Tomura gets severely injured by Endeavor's prominence burn, All For One reaches out his hand and suggests Tomura hand his body over to him. He appears to do so as suddenly a completely entombed Tomura attacks both Endeavor and Izuku with the tendrils of his rivet stab quirk. Endeavor gets impaled, but Katsuki pushes Izuku out of the way and gets impaled instead. Tomura attempts to wrestle back control over his body, while All For One comments that of all the bloodshed on the battle, Katsuki's was the most pointless. This causes Izuku to snap and try to attack Tomura directly as he notices All For One starting to emerge from within Tomura. With him distracted, Tomura manages to grab a hold of Izuku and uses All For One to try and steal One-for-All. Instead, Izuku ends up in a vestige world where he sees All For One fused with Tomura, where Tomura demands All For One not to interfere, but All For One sneers that if it weren't for his intervention, Tomura would be dead. Suddenly, Nana Shimura appears alongside Izuku, as All For One exclaims to Tomura how his dead grandmother has joined them. He goes on to tell them how when he stole quirks, he could hear voices, which caused him to feel some semblance of guilt. However, once he relinquished the quirk, the voices would go away. It wasn't until he met Dr. Garaki that he realized that it was the vestiges of the previous owners he had heard, similar to how organs and cells contain a person's DNA. All For One admits he thought he was the only person that could do this, and realizes when his quirk merged with his younger brothers, it granted him and anyone else who had One For All the ability as well. One For All starts to crumble, as All For One gleefully states that Tomura's rage is overwhelming One For All's will, noticing that this also includes Tomura's hatred for All For One himself, which he's pleased for as it makes him worthy of being the symbol of chaos. Just then, Yoichi appears and helps Nana to push back Tomura's anger. He asks his brother if Tomura is just the next person he's manipulating, while All For One says that he wished he had made his brother his, but that Yoichi refuses to join him. All For One forces Tomura to combine their powers together to take One For All, stating that Izuku is unworthy since he couldn't protect his friends or teacher. Yoichi says they deem Izuku worthy and All For One will never understand why, as he and Nana counter All For One and Tomura, causing Izuku and Tomura to separate and regain consciousness. All For One tells Tomura that they failed and they must retreat and let his body reach 100%, but Tomura refuses and decides to stay and fight against All For One's insistence. All For One takes note of Gigantomachia's arrival and states that he came just in the nick of time before Tomura falls unconscious. Spinner, who's tending to Tomura, remembers what his leader had said before about the hands of his deceased family, bringing him a sickening rage and puts one of those hands onto Tomura's face. This allows Tomura to reawaken. Though All For One is now in full control, he remarks on how his successor found himself some truly great allies, and that the hatred in Tomura's heart serves as a power that gives the vestige of All For One an even greater hold over Tomura's body. All For One uses his radio waves to order the near high-end Nomu to take Tomura's body and retreat. When Spinner reminds All For One of their allies still fighting, the villain coldly states that since Tomura lost, it's only fair that he pays for that loss, and subsequently abandons the remaining members. Just before they leave, Izuku attempts to stop All For One, but the villain easily blasts him away with an air cannon, and tells the hero that they'll meet again once Tomura's body is perfected. The vestige of All For One retreats with the remaining 10 near high-end Nomu, accompanied by Spinner and a compressed Dabi and Skeptic. The surviving heroes try to stop them, but All For One dispatches 3 of the Nomus to confront them. The near high-end's distraction tactics ensured that he, his allies, and 7 others escaped while those 3 were destroyed. A few hours later, in Tartarus, the real All For One is able to sense the condition of Tomura's body, noting that while his expectations were slightly off, it wouldn't be much longer. In the forest, the vestige of All For One remarks that the heroes won't get a tomorrow or the chance to get a moment's rest, since it's his turn to lead, ordering the near high-ends to invade Tartarus to free his real body. Tartarus is hit by a sudden EMP attack on the outside by All For One / Tomura, shutting down the prison security, followed immediately by another EMP attack on the inside by All For One in his original body, unlocking his and all the other cells on the floor as the previously captured villains quickly dispose of the armed guards. The freed, albeit still on life support All For One finally reunites with Tomura Shigaraki, in front of the rest of the prisoners, telling them to join him on his path of devastation to become the greatest demon lord. All For One orchestrates another large-scale attack, using both the Nomu and the freed prisoners to attack 6 different prisons, all to distract the authorities and make it harder for them to track him. All For One is seen sitting with Tomura / All For One and asks Spinner and Dabi to stand guard over him while his body recovers. Spinner asks who Tomura really is, stating All For One wasn't the person he chose to follow. All For One tells Spinner not to worry, saying he has the greatest respect for Tomura's will and that once his body recovers, both of their desires would come to fruition. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Thank you for watching. Adrian out.